Now, let's discuss about the impact of global disruptions on supply chains, as in the tariffs, the trade barriers, and beyond. Global supply chains form the backbone of modern commerce. From the smartphone in a consumer's hand to the packaged food in supermarket, almost every product passes through an intricate web of suppliers, manufacturers, logistic providers, and distributors before reaching its final destination. This interconnectedness has brought efficiency and scale, but it has also exposed vulnerabilities. Disruptions in one part of the chain often ripple across the globe, causing bottlenecks, shortages, and financial losses. One of the most important disruptors in recent decades has been the imposition of tariffs and trade restrictions. Unlike the natural disasters or unforeseen events, tariffs are deliberate political and economic measures that directly reshape supply and demand patterns. While designed to protect domestic industries or balance trade deficits, they often introduce costs, delays, and complexity into global commerce. In addition to tariffs, events such as the COVID-19 pandemic have further revealed the fragility of global supply chains. The pandemic demonstrated how quickly production and logistics could grind to a halt under conditions of border closures, labor shortages, and shifting consumer demand. Yet, while COVID 19 was a sudden and extraordinary crisis, tariffs remain an ongoing structural challenge that many industries must continuously navigate. This discussion will analyze the impact of tariffs as the central theme, followed by an exploration of other disruptions, including COVID 19, demand volatility, capacity constraints, labor shortages, and the bullwhip effect. Tariffs are essentially taxes imposed on imported goods, often calculated as a percentage of the product's value. While governments use them as tools to protect local industries, retaliate against trade partners, or generate revenue, the consequences for supply chains can be profound. When a tariff is placed on a raw material or intermediate good, the immediate result is an increase in the landed cost of that material. For instance, consider a US based car manufacturer that sources steel from multiple countries. If a 20% tariff is imposed on imported steel, the production cost for each car rises substantially. This increase cannot always be absorbed by the manufacturer, meaning it is often passed along to distributors and eventually to consumers. Such cost increases force companies to rethink sourcing strategies. Some attempt to identify domestic alternatives, but these may be limited in capacity or higher in base cost. Others diversify into new international suppliers, but switching takes time and requires building trust and quality assurance. Thus, tariffs generate immediate financial strain and long term strategic complexity. Global supply chains are built on long term partnerships. Suppliers invest in meeting buyer requirements, ensuring quality, and scaling production. When tariffs suddenly make imports uncompetitive, these relationships are jeopardized. For example, if a tariff makes fabric imports from country A too costly, a fashion retailer might shift to country B. However, this disruption risks severing established ties, reducing reliability, and increasing lead times while new suppliers ramp up. One common response to tariffs is relocating production to tariff exempt regions. However, such moves are rarely straightforward. Establishing factories, training labor, and setting up logistics networks in new regions involves years of investment. The uncertainty of future tariff policies complicates decisions. Companies risk moving today only to find tariffs imported in the new region tomorrow. For example, during the US China trade tensions, many electronic companies explored moving assembly lines to Southeast Asia. While some succeeded, others faced bottlenecks due to limited skilled labor, inadequate infrastructure, or regulatory hurdles. Imagine a company Technova that imports microchips from Taiwan for its use in its consumer gadgets. A sudden tariff of 15% is imposed on electronic components from Taiwan. Technova's cost per unit rises by $20, cutting deeply into profit margins. Retail prices must rise, but higher prices reduce demand. Meanwhile, the company scrambles to identify alternate suppliers in South Korea or domestic manufacturers. Yet, shifting suppliers takes months of testing and certification. During this adjustment period, Technova loses market share to a competitor that had already diversified its supply sources. This example highlights how tariffs can not only raise costs but also reduce competitiveness and disrupt long-term market positioning. Demand volatility and risk. While tariffs create predictable cost increases, demand volatility adds up unpredictability. Consumer demand for goods can fluctuate based on seasonality, economic cycles, or even sudden societal trends. When external shocks like tariffs or pandemics occur, volatility becomes more pronounced. For instance, if tariffs raises the prices of imported dairy products, consumers may abruptly shift to domestic brands or substitute products, leaving retailers and distributors holding unsold stock. In another scenario, panic buying, common during global disruptions, may cause sudden spikes in demand for items like medical supplies or household essentials, overwhelming suppliers. Organizations struggle to plan capacity in such environments. A factory may be geared to produce 50,000 units a month, but if demand unexpectedly drops to 20,000, idle capacity leads to financial waste. Conversely, if demand surges to 80,000, unmet orders create frustration and reputational damage. Capacity planning is at the heart of supply chain management, and disruptions magnify mismatches between capacity and demand. If tariffs make certain imported components too costly, factories may underutilize their installed capacity. For instance, an automobile plant might have the capacity to produce 1,000 cars a week, but if imported semiconductors become prohibitively expensive, production could stall at 400 cars. The remaining capacity becomes redundant. The logistics industry is equally vulnerable. Ocean freight, trucking, and air cargo are often fragmented with inconsistent standard across regions. Tariffs may lead to sudden shifts in trade flows, overwhelming some ports while leaving others underutilized. For example, when tariffs redirected textile imports from China to Vietnam, ports in Vietnam experienced congestion while Chinese ports experienced decline. The global logistics network, being unevenly developed, struggled to adapt smoothly. Even the best supply planning model depend on human execution. Labor shortages, health and safety risks, and workforce mobility significantly affect supply chains. During times of tariff driven disruptions, companies often relocate production to tariff free countries. However, these new regions may lack sufficient skilled labor, creating bottlenecks. Training local staff takes time, and the influx of new industries into the same regions can intensify competition for talent. As a secondary but critical case, the COVID 19 pandemic exemplified how labor risks could paralyze supply chains. Workers returned to hometowns or faced movement restrictions, leading to severe shortages in factories, warehouses, and trucking fleets. Even industries not directly affected by tariffs, such as food processing, suffered delays because there were not enough truck drivers to move goods. While tariffs represent an ongoing structural challenge, the COVID 19 pandemic served as a stress test that revealed systemic weakness. Borders closed, flights were grounded, and shipping vessels were delayed. Goods piled up in ports due to lack of containers. Aerospace and tourism collapsed almost overnight, illustrating how dependent some industries are on global mobility. Panic buying of essential and a collapse in luxury goods demanded forced companies. Panic buying of essentials and a collapse in luxury goods demanded Panic buying of essentials and a collapse in luxury goods demand forced companies Panic buying of essentials and a collapse in luxury goods demand forced companies to pivot rapidly. The pandemic may have been extraordinary, but it underscored lessons that also apply to tariff disruptions. Supply chains must be flexible, diversified, and resilient. A classic supply chain challenge, the bullwhip effect, becomes more severe during global disruptions. The bullwhip effect occurs when small fluctuations in demand at the retail level create exaggerated distortions upstream. Consider a household cleaning spray. Normally, monthly demand is around 10,000 units. Suddenly, due to tariffs on imported raw chemicals, production slows and only 4,000 units can be supplied. Retailers experience shortages and customers start checking multiple stores. Each store records this inquiry as separate demand. By the time distributors consolidate requests, the demand appears to be 30,000 units, far above the true 10,000. Manufacturers reacting to this inflated signal overproduce in subsequent months. Only supply normalizes. Retailers are left with excess stock, leading to waste and price drops. The original shortfall triggered by tariffs cascades into a wild swings of under and oversupply. The recurring lessons across disruptions, whether tariffs, pandemics, or demand shocks, is the need for flexibility. Companies must avoid over reliance on one country or vendor. Developing alternative suppliers reduces vulnerability. Organizations should run models simulating tariff hikes, shipping delays, or labor shortages, preparing contingency responses. Holding safety stock of critical materials can be buffer against sudden price hikes or shortages. Tools like AI driven demand forecasting, blockchain enabled supply visibility, and advanced analytics improves response times. Communication between sales teams, demand planners, and supply managers is essential to identify whether demand spikes are real or inflated by volume effects. Global supply chains are powerful engines of growth, but they are highly sensitive to disruptions. Tariffs as intentional Tariffs as intentional political instruments reshape trade flows, raise costs, and force companies to rethink sourcing and manufacturing strategies. Unlike natural disasters, tariffs are not random. They are deliberate, long term challenges that require structural adaptation. COVID 19, while secondary in the discussion, highlighted additional vulnerabilities from labor shortages to transport standstills. Together, tariffs and pandemics illustrate that disruptions are not occasional anomalies but enduring realities. The path forward lies in flexibility, diversifying suppliers, balancing capacity, leveraging technology, and critically questioning assumptions about demand. By building resilience into every layer of the supply chain, organizations can not only survive global disruptions but turn them into opportunities for strategic advantage.